It's the Go Gopher Podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 59. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. We're talking Golden Gopher football on today's Go Gopher Podcast. The Gopher Guru Daniel House from gophersguru.com will join me. He breaks down film, does features, he studies analytics, and a whole bunch more for his webpage. And he's full of great Gopher insight. He's been a guest many times before, and you'll love his visit today. We talk about the new assistant coaching staff, what it might mean in terms of schemes on both sides of the ball, what he's looking for in the upcoming spring practice period, and he also takes a look at next week's NFL Combine as it relates to the 4 Gopher invitees. Daniel House will be our guest coming up. Our Go Gopher podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. Get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. We're also glad to have Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union with us on the Go Gopher podcast. Affinity Plus has been a longtime Gopher supporter and also a major backer of Special Olympics Minnesota, and the Polar Plunges are starting. Affinity Plus is your local credit union throughout the state of Minnesota. Find out more at affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Our podcast is also sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland at ChamplinInsurance.com. We are podcasting episode 59 from the Aquarius Home Services studio. We invite you to subscribe to the Go Gopher podcast. You can also go back and listen to previous Go Gopher podcast. Last week, for example, we talked with Gopher great Pat Micheletti on Gopher hockey and his incredible family. If you missed it, I promise you'll enjoy it, so go back and listen. It's free to subscribe to the podcast and free to listen at any time. This week, it's episode 59 with an absolute Golden Gopher football info rock star, Daniel House. He joins us next.
I'm Clay Geary, walk-on turned scholarship wide receiver for Gopher football.
And I'm Ben Utek, U of M alumni, Super Bowl champion, and Tony Dungy Uncommon Award winner. We understand championship culture, which is why we're part of the True North family of companies.
True North invests in only elite teams, like the champion team at Sunbelt Business Advisors. With more brokers, buyers, and offers, Sunbelt gets owners 15% more than the market average.
Learn more about this True North company at sunbeltminnesota.com.
Hi, Gopher fans. Switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on lights, we switch TV channels, we switch on the TV. And with the new transfer portal, some college students even switch colleges, which can seem crazy to us die-hard fans. But what's not crazy is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, my agency can switch you over so we can start saving today. My team is ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood and show you it is, in fact, easy to switch and save. When you want the real deal, check us out at ChamplinInsurance.com. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Welcome to episode number 59, the Go Gopher podcast. We're going to be talking some Golden Gopher football. The spring game date was announced. It's April the 22nd, 11 a.m. at Huntington Bank Stadium, and I know a lot of folks are excited. Spring practice actually gets underway in a little over 3 weeks from now, and we're going to talk some Gopher football here with the Gopher Guru Daniel House. He returns to the podcast. It's always great to be able to have Daniel on to talk football. He's got great insight, great perspective. Gophersguru.com is the webpage. Daniel, good to see you.
Grimmer, always good to see you. I was wondering if you were going to make it on for this pod coming all the way from Maryland, but you did it. You accomplished the goal.
We were on the road with the basketball team, 2 feet of snow or so in Minneapolis, and God bless the pilots who got us in. As we tape this on Thursday, they got us in today, and only to get back to know that now I get to hop in the car and drive to Lincoln tomorrow morning for the game Saturday. So that's always fun as well.
You'll make it work, man. That's why you're the best in the biz.
Yeah, we'll make it work. We'll make it work. Well, hey, you've been breaking down some film from the Golden Gopher 2022 season, the regular season, the bowl game. We're now looking ahead certainly to the spring practice period, which is upcoming next month. And, we're only a week away from March and 3 weeks from practice starting. The spring game, as we mentioned, April 22nd. And then before you know it, August will be here. I'm not trying to rush summer because, gosh knows, with 25 inches of snow outside, we don't want summer to go away that quickly. But it will be here before we know it, August, and then the season will start. And so there's a lot to talk about, certainly. And even as we are taping the podcast right now, there's some transfer news as well. And all of that will be worthy of discussion. New coaches. In fact, maybe that's where we can start. Let's do that. Daniel House with GophersGuru.com. The Gopher coaching staff, as it has now for a few years, has a little bit of turnover. I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a great thing. You'd love continuity, but I also think it means that PJ Fleck has hired good coaches who are valued at other spots, and most of those times a guy leaves, it's for a better position and upward mobility. And I think Fleck has talked about the idea that that's the kind of staff he wants, achievers and guys who are looking. So that has created some holes. And let's start by talking about both coordinators. Really, there's three, right, in terms of new guys or new assignments. And we'll start on the offensive end. Very familiar faces taking the place of Kirk Shiraka, who left for Rutgers, the wide receivers coach and the tight end coach, Matt Simon, and John Harbaugh Greg Harbaugh are the two guys that will be co-offensive coordinators. So your thoughts?
I like the idea of having just a collaborative room of guys that have been around the program. So, you have a feel for the current personnel and some of the things that they've done in the past. And then PJ was able to bring in some other staff members to complement that. I'm most fascinated just to see how they put their spin on the offense. It's been the RPO game and, the ability to pair that up with play action, and then the rushing attack obviously being the bread and butter of what they do, executing that at such a high level. Now I want to see how the offense evolves with them. They brought in some personnel at the wide receiver spot with Elijah Spencer and Crooms, and, just building that wide receiver room with some dynamic players there. And then, running back Sean Tyler from Western Michigan. So getting faster, having some threats at the receiver position, opening some things up to be, multidimensional offensively. I know balance has been kind of the buzzword that everybody talks about. They think 50-50 is kind of the end all be all when you're talking about balance, but I think it's multidimensional. That's how I look at it, is being able to take what the defense gives you and, be able to create space in the passing game. And, if they're loading the box, you're able to win vertically and then, create space underneath and spread the football around to all your playmakers. I mean, they have a lot of intriguing playmakers in that receiver room. And then Brevin Spanford now coming back as well as a huge addition, huge part of that playmaking room. So I look at Harbaugh and Simon. I want to see how, the offense evolves, screens, generate more yards after the catch, maybe some, blending in some pace occasionally, just some things that they can do to sort of complement what they do really well and build around the personnel that you have, because that's the best thing you can do is maximize the personnel that you have.
Yeah, I think there's no question that they've upgraded some of the receiver spots offensively with the transfers, and then we'll see with Chris Ottman-Bell as well coming back what how he recovers from injury. And then maybe the biggest change in the entire offense is the quarterback position, right? With Ethan Kelly-McManus, right. He's a sure shot starter, barring some sort of injury. That's the guy that is going to get the first snap on that season opener. There's no question about that. And so the question too, to me, is what will those two guys do, if anything, to change the look of the offense with a quarterback who has a different skill set than our buddy Tanner Morgan, who has been, a 5-year starter and was very successful, the winningest quarterback in the program's history. But with Calic Manis, there are some different skill sets, and I wonder, what do you think? What do you think that? I don't think we're going to see a whole like, hey, you're just going to throw it 75 times a game. But I wonder what we might see in terms of change based on the quarterback position.
Well, I'd say, the core basis of what they do will remain the same, the RPO game, but then what do they do off of that with play action, being able to throw the ball down the field. And I look at, Corey Crooms, for example, is targeted 32 times on passes of 20 plus yards last year. That was the sixth highest mark in the FBS. And then you look at Elijah Spencer in man coverage situations, he averaged 3.6 yards per route run, which was 18th among FBS receivers. So the ability to win in man coverage and stretch downfield are intriguing traits. And Elijah Spencer is very good in contested catch situations. When I went through and watched Charlotte film. I was impressed with how he's able to win in those traffic situations. So those two guys being able to stretch vertically and then also create yards after the catch. I talked a lot about that on the website, being able to improve yards after the catch. It's been a trend, over the past 4 or 5 years, being able to, improve in that area. We'll talk a lot about that this offseason. I've been studying a lot of things related to yards after the catch. So with that being said, having those playmakers like that and Ethan's ability to throw the ball downfield, 20 plus yards and, maximizing getting the ball around to all your playmakers, it helps you create space in the passing game underneath. And they're able to stretch the seam with Brevin Span forward, get a lot of coverage attention. Maybe they're bracketing players on the outside. Like Daniel Jackson emerged last year as, just made strides as the season progressed. You think about him and Spencer and Bell, Crooms, maybe Dalen Wright, putting all the pieces together.
And Brockington.
And Brockington, Christian Hoskins, they have a lot of competition in that room now. It's right where I'd like to see it. Like last year, I thought maybe they were 1 or 2 receivers away from really having a complete room there. Now they have a lot of competition to push players and then build around. Like you said, Ethan's got some mobility. So what does the quarterback run game look like? Are they able to incorporate some of that in there? There is a lot of intrigue to what they can do offensively. That's why I say, early down passing, screens, generating yards after the catch, some of the things they do maybe with the quarterback run game. I can't wait to go to spring practice and just kind of get a feel for some of the things they're doing.
Yeah, and how they handle that for sure. And with Calais McManus, just as an offshoot to our conversation, what did you see from him in the Wisconsin game where he was freshman of the week, threw for 319 yards, and then in the bowl game he started hot as a pistol. Was it 8 for 10? I think he hit 8 for his first 10. Mm-hmm. I had a unique look at that because the press box was in the end zone, so you don't get to see that end zone look very often. Very hard as a radio guy to try to call a game from the end zone. That said, it was a unique look to see. There were at least 2 passes he threw that when he let them go, and I saw them go from my perspective because I'm just not used to that angle. I'm like, where's he throwing that? And it ends up right on target, right on time. And I'm like, man, this is kind of fun to watch from here. Maybe there's some throws that we haven't seen. So based on, let's say, about those 6 quarters of Wisconsin and Syracuse, 5.5 quarters, what was your assessment? Because at least statistically, it looked like he was at a pretty high level.
Yeah, arm talent and ability to put the ball in those tighter windows is something that Ethan can do at a high level. Now it's just all about the experience that he gained at the end of last season is huge because right. he knows where he's at, the processing of the game, the speed of it, handling all the things that you got to deal with, standing at the line of scrimmage, what things you're looking for, getting players in the right spot, the checks at the line of scrimmage, all those different things that you have to do, seeing the field. All the tasks that are required to play quarterback at a high level, there were so many flashes where, being able to throw the ball vertically and fit it in with accuracy downfield and, being able to, have the ability. We saw this even in practices, just being able to step away from the pressure, extend just enough to buy that half second and get the ball out. I talked to a lot of players, former players are telling me, there's a lot of splash plays in practice when nobody's there, like where you're going, man, that just shows you the flashes. So think about when it all comes together, when he has the confidence and the experience, and he went into this offseason gaining a ton of stuff from just getting a few snaps at the end of last season. And now with, Greg and Matt working together to develop a system and playmakers around him, it'll be fun to see, how they accentuate his strengths, because I think the vertical element with those receivers that they brought in that room that they have, combined with maybe trying to screen more, use the QB run game, get the ball out in space. There's just a ton of different options that definitely we'll be talking about on the site as the offseason progresses.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Obviously, we know the kid has talent. Now it's just a matter of, how it gets processed and how what progress he makes. And you mentioned you talked to some former players and even I think current players talk about it. I had Newman on this podcast, Tyler Newman, the All-America candidate safety who is coming back for the Gophers. It was, maybe 3/4 of the way through the season. Great interview. Kid's so impressive, and that's why I'm thrilled he's back, not just because he's a good player, but those are the kind of kids you want to keep around the program just from a leadership standpoint. But when the podcast was all done, then we're just kind of standing around, walking, out of the studio, and I don't remember even how it came up, but I said something about, how do you like Athan, and he didn't really say anything, but he gave the look. He kind of gave me the look like, just wait, man. I mean, this kid, he's like, just wait, and so that was enough for me to understand that there's something to be excited about there for number 8, I think.
Yeah, it's the upside is there. I mean, it's just now it's all about putting everything together, putting him in the best positions to be successful. That's the key.
All right, so we've talked about the offensive coordinator. One of the coaches that came here with PJ Fleck from the very beginning was Kenny Burns. He has gotten his shot at a relatively young age as a head coach. He is off to Kent State. Sounds like he's off to a pretty good start recruiting-wise as well, which is no surprise for anyone who's been around. And that MAC is just such a, it's a year-to-year deal in terms of, who can make the run and who has the cycle of veteran players and who can withstand the transfer portal and then add. And so I'm excited for Kenny Burns to get his shot. What that does, of course, is frees up the running back coaching position for the first time. And running back has been a staple, clearly, in the time that P.J. Fleck and his staff has been here with Ibrahim and Smith and Brooks and who else we're forgetting, a bunch of guys in there. And they've got now, some question marks just in the sense that there's no Mo for the first time in a long time. And Nick McKissick-Luke is the new running backs coach. And what can you tell us about his background a little bit? And what do you foresee from him taking over, a spot that, frankly, has some big shoes to fill?
Yeah, I look at McKissick-Luke's background and I see someone who's worked under a really good running backs coach with Thomas Hammock, who was on John Harbaugh's staff for 5 seasons in Baltimore and has a track record of doing a lot of great things with running backs and the rushing scheme as well. And there's other ties as well. McKissick-Luke was at Youngstown State. That's where Jim Tressel was president for a while, one of PJ's mentors. I'm sure he provided some feedback on the hire. McKissick-Luke did a nice job with Tevin McMaster at Youngstown State as a special teams background, so potentially could help with the return game in that area too. I think that's always an added bonus when you have coaches that have experience in that specific area at multiple stops, and was at South Dakota State for a while. So, just a diverse background at all levels. And you look at coaches that have coached at that lower level and worked their way up, they're working with less, overall talent, from a rating perspective. So they're tasked with coaching the fundamentals and working a lot of different things to get players in the best positions to be successful. So Nick McKissick-Luke is someone that I think, attractive job for him to come to Minnesota. You see, with Kenny Burns elevating up, and I mean, Mike Hart worked with PJ for a while and he's at Michigan now. So, I mean, you look at the ability to elevate up in that position, it's attractive. And I think he provides a lot of intrigue in terms of his background and what he's done in the past.
And I mentioned there's some question marks within the running back room because there's no Mo. I guess technically that's the first time Mo hasn't been. This will be the first time PJ Fleck has a team that Mo is not part of, because that very first team, Mo was on the scout team. So you think about that. I mean, it's hard to imagine, but that's the case. So it will be a different looking room. There'll be certainly some familiar faces in that room as well. So give me a little breakdown. And then, of course, they hit the recruiting hard. They got a transfer kid in as well. Give me a breakdown of the running back room, if you would.
Yeah. You look at Sean Tyler. It's so intriguing. When I dug into the numbers a bit initially, I was like, wow, he had a 49.3% breakaway run percentage. So breakaway run percentage measures a back's ability to break off a big play, essentially. So it takes the percentage is calculated by taking the yards gained on runs over 15 yards and then dividing it by a rushing yard. So he was doing a nice job of creating explosive runs, and then the ability to add speed. You look at, his track background, going back to high school, someone who can threaten you in space, make the first player miss. That's a huge part of the zone scheme, is being able to do that. So I look at him with the acceleration and short area quickness, being able to threaten second level defenders in space and then provide that element as a receiver. And then, you look at Zach Evans, someone who I was very high on when Minnesota landed him out of Texas. People got to remember, played 6A football in Texas. So he's got some seasoning. He's played against really good competition. We saw a flash late in one of the games last year, just this guy, his ability to accelerate. I think that's one of his best traits. You saw it on his high school film and just being around practices a little bit. Like he can hit the hole and go, and is starting to develop that feel for blocks and the instincts of the running back position. So I think he's definitely someone who has a lot of upside and will get better with more reps. And then Darius Taylor being one of the prize players, just an explosive weapon from this last recruiting class, winning out on a big recruiting battle there to land him. I'm so intrigued to see what he can do. Like, I haven't watched him in a live setting yet. So spring practice definitely is going to be something I'm going to be watching.
And then obviously Trey Potts returns.
Yep.
And Bryce Williams returns, it sounds like. So Bryce will be here for a while. Well, this will be his 7th year, maybe, right? Am I right about that? Is this 7th for Bryce?
Yep.
Yeah.
I believe it's 7th. Yeah, it's crazy how the COVID year and everything, you can't even keep track of all the years that these guys have been here. But like you said, the experience of them, being able to have them in that room as some of these younger players, continue to develop, and you can dash reps in for them. It's exciting about, kind of the next era of the running back room here, because Kenny Burns left this thing in a really good position. Like you said, Kenny, he's going to do a great job at Kent State.
Yeah, and I'm interested with Potts, too, because he flashed so much 2 years ago and was not the same running back last year. But I have to believe that there were both physical and maybe even, some doubts in his head as he was getting the football at times based on the significance of the injury he suffered. So I wonder if putting another season now behind that and getting another offseason work, that if he won't, I'd love to see that kid get back into his comfort zone and flash the way he did 2 years ago.
Absolutely. I believe that this will be, a season where, Trey Potts is going to get a lot of opportunities. And, like you said, last year, just coming back, adjusting back to playing again after everything that happened. So, him and Bryce, they'll definitely have a share of reps, as well as with Sean Tyler, who's a different type of skill set at the back position, like I was describing earlier. So they have a lot of different skill sets that they can work with in that position room. And I'm also intrigued to see how they can maybe get the screen game going for those guys. Because, Bryce Williams has shown that capability occasionally. Trey Potts, Sean Tyler, all those guys can catch the football. And I think that's one of the elements that certainly, as I've been studying NFL and college stuff recently, I think being able to incorporate the backs into the passing game really adds a lot to your offense, because, a lot of these teams are stretching vertically, and, the defense is accounting for all these dynamic weapons, bracketing. And when you're able to extend vertically, you're able to get a lot of opportunities underneath for the backs. And these pass rushes get so aggressive, being able to drop a screen in there right behind that pressure. I'm intrigued by that.
All right, let's move on to the other coach on offense who's been added, with Harbaugh going from tight ends coach to co-offensive coordinator. I think Harbaugh is also going to work with the quarterbacks. That brings in
Correct.
Andrew Soder, the new tight end coach. Tell us about his background and what you foresee his strengths to be, and then we'll talk about the tight ends on the roster after that.
I'm so intrigued by Andrew Soder. He has a really unique background with Sean Lewis at Kent State, who just became Deion Sanders' offensive coordinator. And he worked in a really efficient offense. How I describe it is like, it's that Big Ten physicality mindset with a little bit of up-tempo spread, blending those two things together. They stretched teams vertically. They had a really good screen game, and they built a really dynamic rushing attack that sort of complemented the passing concepts that they have. So, you got the defense thinking about, man, this looks similar to a rushing concept, but really it's a pass. And they're able to make little subtle tweaks off of that make them sort of hard to defend. And he has a background, with the spread offenses that stops and power read stuff. So I think you can maybe tie the power read stuff into the play action and RPO games, and sort of maybe take advantage of Ethan Kaliakmanis' athletic ability. He's offenses, when you look at them, the screen game is something that was really noticeable. And I wrote about this on the website. The numbers between Kent State and Minnesota when it comes to screen passes, Kent State loved to run screen passes. And I know that they repped them a lot, hard day one, screens on air. They're moving defenders all over to just simulate. People don't realize how hard it is for offensive linemen to block in space, change direction, do all the things that you have to do to execute a screen game. They did a ton of that and kind of used it as a form of conditioning at Kent State. So I'm watching that as something that he can help install some of this dynamic screen game into the offense to add a new element. And then some of the concepts in the rushing side of it. He's worked with a lot of really good offensive line coaches. Randy Clements at Baylor was with Brian Callahan at Eastern Illinois, so they already have chemistry. They were actually together with Jimmy Garoppolo at Eastern Illinois. Bill O'Boyle, who was just hired as Deion's offensive line coach as well. He's one of the more creative and respected minds when it comes to modern rushing concepts. So the background that he has is super unique, and I think it's something that he can bring some fresh perspective and ideas to Minnesota's offensive room to kind of collaborate with everybody that's elevating up in that room.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. We didn't talk about this, but from that standpoint, too, there's who's a guy from Miami of Ohio who's coming in as an analyst. I mean, that guy, was he offensive coordinator there for a minute?
Correct. Eric Kohler, he was OC and assistant head coach, worked with the QBs there. He's coming in as an analyst as well. And, I mean, you look at him, Keegan O'Hara as well. He worked with Brian Hartline, the wide receivers coach at Ohio State, so one of the top wide receiver coaches in the country. And he brings some perspective of being in a Ryan Day offense that I have a lot of respect for and spent a lot of time studying. So bringing in some experience there. I mean, there's a lot of play calling experience coming in here. I mean, you got Soder, who was an offensive coordinator. You got Kohler coming in as offensive coordinator, and then you got, the perspective of Keegan O'Hara as well. You're getting to that spot now where I think teams are starting to prepare with these analyst roles, knowing that the NCAA is probably going to eventually limit the cap, and they're going to allow those guys to work on field and coach in that capacity. So they're expanding their staffs in preparation for that. So that could be potentially some of the reason why these schools are attracting some of these guys for analyst jobs.
So before I get over to the defensive side, I guess the put a bow on the offensive side, and you mentioned a lot of really interesting concepts in terms of screen games and speed the pace up a little bit, the way that Kent State did with Soder and a bunch of these guys. And then you've got Simon and Harbaugh, who certainly will have their philosophies, and they have been around here. And then PJ is set in a certain way, it seems, with what he wants to do. How do you think it all ends up? Where will this offense, what will it look like? If you could, spin a ball on the roulette wheel and take a gamble as to, if you had to place a winning bet, how will this offense, and balance I know is relative, but how do you think it'll look? How do you think things will go?
That's the $1 million question, man. If I could go in that room right now and just sit for like a week and just hear what they're doing and kind of listen to how they're going to build this thing, I want to know. Like, I don't think they're going to shy away from, being a rushing, pound the rock type of team. I think that's so important. You look at Kent State, what they did. They were very, very physical, inside zone power stuff, and then just tying the passing game into that. So, Minnesota has shown that they have a diverse rushing scheme, and they've executed that at extremely high level. So that's the bread and butter. But now tying the run game into that passing attack, I think I said it earlier with multidimensional offense, layering your passing concepts from drop back to RPO to play action and spreading the ball around to create space for your playmakers. I think that's the key. Everybody thinks that, balance is all about 50-50, but really it's about getting all of your playmakers involved, distributing the ball all over, making the defense account for all your playmakers. That will naturally create space. So I think those are a couple things: spreading people out, using some pre-snap motion to get some coverage identification and displacing defenders in the run game. And like I said, screens, slowing the pass rush down. And then, you don't have to be run and gun, but I think varying the pace and the tempo is something that's very useful. And there are certain times to do it. Like, I spent a lot of time studying when is the right time to use tempo. And I think there's some secret sauce there. So I'm interested to see if that's something that Minnesota sort of incorporates in. But those are some of the things I'm watching for, among many things. We got a lot of time to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I'm super intrigued because they got a lot of perspectives, Grim, like just unique perspectives coming in here on the offensive side of the ball. And you mentioned a few of them, but the existing personnel and the coaching staff side with the new guys, I'm intrigued.
Yeah, and those analysts oftentimes, as you mentioned, they're not allowed to get in and do drills and coach, but a lot of what they'll do is game planning, game prep. They'll study film and they'll offer insights, and I think it's important, particularly when you got, a couple of first-time coordinators who we love and have called games before, and now you factor in the experience in support of those guys, and it should be good. And I agree with your pace, the comment on pace, especially with this team in the past. I understand they wanted to, and I have no qualms with it. I know some people do. I have no qualms with the run the clock. Now, there were times where I thought running the clock down to 1 second every time was a nuisance, and it didn't help, particularly 2 years ago. I didn't think that helped Tanner Morgan much, but I understand the purpose of it. That said, there were some games, for example, Purdue this year at home and maybe Illinois on the road where nothing's really going. It's hard. It would have been, I think, a good time, and I know that in their mind that they felt like, hey, this isn't our identity. We don't want to do it. But just for a change of pace, see what happens. Purdue certainly wasn't going to be ready for it, right? Go run a no huddle. Go run a hurry up. Do something just to see if you can, put some life into it. Jumpstart it. Put the defibrillator on it. Something. And so I agree with you. I'd like to see it. I'm not saying every game run 7,500 plays, but if there's 4, even 5 times in a season, in a 13-game season, there might be 5 to 8 times where it's like, man, we got to do something here. Let's try hurry up or pace or something, Plus, if you show it on film, it just means it's another half hour that the other analyst and the other defensive staff has to worry about getting ready for.
Yeah, and if it's done at the right times, there's some unique times to try using tempo that I think teams should take advantage of. If a college team wants to hire me for that insight, then hey,
it's the gophersguru.com.
Yeah, that's the behind the scenes content. But I think the whole idea of pace is like it gives you an injection of energy offensively. Like if you need to find a rhythm, sometimes that can provide it. Like you watch so many of these games and you study the game like I do. I like to watch the TV copies of games to just get a feel for the flow. Like I think some of these coaches get ingrained in the idea of like, let's just watch the games and film cuts. Like everybody just cut up third down, second down, first down. I think you gain a lot of value watching the flow of the game, just the actual game copy, because you can feel the ebbs and flows and understand how everything fits together. And I just feel as if the pace is something that a lot of teams don't capitalize upon. And you can go way too far down that line. Like you can run way too many plays and you put so much pressure on your defense. If you can find the right way to blend Big Ten physicality ball control with a little bit of pace to keep the defense sort of on their heels, I think that's a recipe for success.
Yeah, you are barking up the tree that I've been barking up for almost 20 years. And I love all coaches, and I know they work hundreds of hours. I watch games, and I'm not claiming to be a genius, but I watch games, and I'm not talking specific to the Gophers here by any means, but just watching games in general, even NFL games. These are the top of the world 1% best coaches, right, ever, coaching in the NFL, and some of the game management decisions they make are baffling. And for 20 years, I've been talking about this idea that the problem is this. Coaches, yes, they work hard. They watch hundreds of hours of film. They tell their analysts, they tell their GAs, they say, "Hey, get me all the cut-ups of this week's opponent's second and mid-range and 2-point conversions and onside kicks and what happens when they run out of the shotgun." And so they do this, and they have to, but that's all they do. And then they know what to do in a specific situation, but none of it is in relation to how the game is going. None of it is ever in relation to, well, what do they do on third down in the fourth quarter? And how should we respond? Because here there's 4 minutes left in the game, and the decision might be more valuable to make in relation to the time than it is in relation to what the other team might do on most 2nd and 8s. You know what I'm saying? And coaches just get lost in that. And I understand it. They're working hard. There's only a limited number, but I couldn't agree more. There have been some teams now that have employed game managers in the press box, right? Where their sole purpose is to calculate percentages of what to do here. And I think that might be overboard, but I do think there are times in games where coaches lose track of things because that part of the preparation gets lost. I will say this, watching PJ Flex teams practice, they do a lot of game situations. They practice a lot of that stuff. But, I'm going back to my time covering the St. Louis Rams, for example, when I lived in St. Louis, and that would sometimes drive me nuts at the NFL. They would just be so strategic and analytical and then forget that it's it's a 60-minute game with specific situations that call for specific decisions, and sometimes you get lost in that.
Well, and that's what I think PJ is outstanding with, is the situational side of it. Like they rep so many different things. Like when I go to their practices, I've been to a lot of different practices. I like to study how people practice. Like what are the things that they do? And PJ is so articulate, detailed when it comes to repping every situation. Like I remember going last year to spring ball, and he's talking about situations when to put the ball over the goal line. Like all those little details are covered in practice. And he does a great job of that, where I think sometimes coaches lose sight of that, where they're not focused on making sure that those things become instinct in games, rather than the first time you're doing it is a game. You want to make it hard in practice so that you get to the point when you're in the game, it's just instinct. You're going out and doing it. The games are easy. And so, like you said, being able to feel the flow of the game, you can definitely go the game management route and have all that. But I think being able to blend football instinct with that, analytical side, that's where the sweet spot is.
No question, 100%. Even like, let's say you got a 8-point lead with 4 minutes left and you're 2nd and 8. What you have watched 100 hours of film on that week on 2nd and 8. Here's our best 2nd and 8 plays, and if none of them involve handing the ball off, none of them are any good, right? But because the situation in the game should dictate that you want to run time, but the best plays for 2nd and 8 on your play sheet are probably the top 5 are passing plays out of shotgun. And if you're up 4, the other team has no timeouts, and you're up 8. I'm sorry, if there's 4 minutes left, you're up 8. The other team has no timeouts. There's no way you should be throwing that football, right? But that's what the play sheet says, and that's sometimes what a coach will do, and then it's incomplete, and all of a sudden you're punting the ball back, and people are wondering what you're doing, and that's a very simplified version, and I suppose there's some analytical guy out there who's going to say that I'm crazy on that, but to me, that's just a simplified version of what we're talking about there, is that sometimes on your play card, the best 2nd and 8 play doesn't fit the situation of the game, so you have to find the best situation in the game. I think too often coaches don't want to veer away from that play card because they justify it by, oh man, I've watched 128 hours of film this week, and this is what the best play for 2nd and 8 is, and it might not be.
Well, game state matters so much, like how much you're up by, what the score is. Like if you're playing from behind, you want to protect the lead. Like all those things matter, and you got to be thinking a couple plays ahead, like you said, the 2nd and 8. And you're going, is this 2-down territory here? You got to think a couple plays ahead. I think that's something that I've heard a lot about Brett Bielema and the mindset of Barry Lunny and him, where they're thinking a couple plays ahead. They reach a certain spot on the field and they're going, this is where we're comfortable going for it, and we got a 2-play mindset. On 2nd down, you're already thinking about the next couple of plays, knowing that you'll probably go for it on 4th down. So it's all those little things. This game is so complex. It's so fascinating, though. Like I sit down and love studying these decisions and how people handle it. That's the fun part for me.
Yeah, no question. And I think it'll be fun to see how this Gopher offense evolves, and with a new quarterback and a bunch of new other playmakers where it heads. Okay, so we have gone a long time here talking offense, and that's fine. A couple of new defensive coaches as well, and I'm excited about both of them. I'm really excited. We had Winston Delatabadir, former Gopher, on this podcast about a month ago. He couldn't have been more excited. He was so, he was always a great guy to interview. He did great work for the community when he was a player here. And here's a guy who is just a couple years out of college now, who is a Big Ten assistant coach. I think it's a great hire. I think it's a great hire both for recruiting and for technique. And he's worked under a bunch of guys. Even here, he had 3 or 4 different defensive line coaches, and Marcus West was one of those who got him a shot as a GA at Charlotte and on to Oregon with another former Gopher assistant football coach, and then off to Kent State with some connections he made at Oregon as a full-time assistant, and here he is. So if people haven't listened to that podcast, I encourage him to go back and listen. I know, Daniel, you said you had a chance to listen to it, and man, he's just such a ball of energy, and I'm thrilled, even though he's young, because people say, man, that's a young guy to be coaching in the Big Ten. I think he's all there for it. I think it's the right call to bring him back.
Yeah, and Joe Rossi and him have worked together before. Like, Joe's got a great feel for which staff members fit, which guys are going to provide value and then fit into this NIL landscape, where it's like you got a young guy now providing, that next gen approach to recruiting and connecting in that way. Having a young member on staff in that type of role is great. And he's also went to school here. He's there for a long time, knows the tradition of the school, understands a lot of that. So, there's like a newcomer coordinator title attached to the defensive line coach role as well. So he's definitely going to be helping in that respect as well. So you mentioned it as well, the background side of it with Winston Delatabadir. I think the biggest thing is going back to the year he spent in Oregon with Mario Cristobal. And he was a GA there. He accepted that offer, and he worked with Kayvon Thibodeau in 2021. and he was responsible for scout team offensive line looks. And that was a big responsibility, especially since Mario Cristobal is an offensive line guru. Like, he is one of the top offensive line minds in the country. So Winston learning through that lens, understanding already what it's like to be a player setting up pass rushing moves, but thinking through the prism of how offensive linemen approach certain things in the schemes and all the details. Like, people have no idea how complex offensive line play is. I think people just watch the games, they turn on, they go, man, outside zone, inside zone. Like, there are so many variations. You know, you got, tight zone, all these different things coming off of that, where you have different aiming points for the running back, different techniques for the O-line. Like, it is a complex process. So Winston having that background to teach players kind of the reverse way of learning is something that's valuable. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned his background, because in the podcast that he was on with us, he talked about his time at Oregon, not only with Cristobal, but is it Joe Morehouse was the OC there. He ended up getting the job at Akron, but that was the connection, how he got the defensive line coach. He brought him Winston with, and that what you mentioned there is exactly why. So Winston was in charge of the scout team defense and giving the offensive line looks, and Morehouse would come over, he said, regularly and say, "What, here's this and why is this and why in this." He said, "I always wondered, why does this offensive coach just keep coming over and asking me questions, about it?" And he said, little did he know, he was kind of quizzing him, because he's like, if I ever get another shot to be a head coach, he was at Mississippi State, talking about Morehouse now, I'm going to have to assemble a staff. And he's like, and I think he was impressed with the young man. And so guess what? He gets hired, and this GA, Winston DeLaudibideer, becomes a full-time assistant at Akron, and they had a pretty good defensive line. And in the podcast, if people go back and listen, Winston also talks about how much of PJ Fleck's philosophy came out in him as a coach, which he didn't know he had until he just started coaching. He's in charge.
It is, and him being someone who, graduated here and had so much success, I always joked with him when I do stories, because you always, if you wanted to learn about William offense, you go over to Winston DeLaudibideer. Any defensive lineman you want to learn, you go for the story and you ask about him. I remember he's like, boy, he's going to blow the lid off the combine. And sure enough, he did. So I always joke with Winston that he would be back here coaching someday. And so I was joking with him when he ended up getting the job. I'm like, I told you, man, you'd be here. We did an interview like right at the heart of the pandemic. And I remember we were going through film clips together, breaking stuff down. And I'm like, dude, yeah, you're going to be back here soon enough.
Yep. And he was. And he even in that podcast he mentioned, he's like, everybody else, he goes, they always said you'll be back. And it's like, maybe. And he's like, they all knew and I didn't. And here he is. So that's fun. All right. So another guy they brought in for the defensive back position is Nick Monroe, who has a bunch of cool storylines relating to Minnesota. His official title will be co-defensive coordinator and then the cornerbacks coach. And, of course, Minnesota lost a couple of guys, including on the defensive line, including the cornerbacks coach. The cornerbacks coach went to Wisconsin. And anyway, I think this is a good hire here. Nick Monroe, who he's pretty well regarded as a recruiter nationally, isn't he?
Yeah, Nick Monroe is someone that I immediately was intrigued by. And it's so crazy because I was doing research for the game and I was watching all the Syracuse stuff and I looked through the coaching staff and I'm like, okay, who's the corners coach here? And who's co-DC, interim DC for the game? It was Nick Monroe. And I went, oh, Allegheny, PA must have crossed paths with Joe Rossi. So I was asking Joe during the press conference at the Pinstripe Bowl about Nick Monroe. And he's like, yeah, we crossed paths. And he was telling an intramural basketball story, officiating at basketball games, intramural basketball games or something like that. And then all of a sudden I'm asking Nick about Minnesota, and he's like, yeah, my dad, Marty, was a GA under Jim Wacker. So I spent a whole bunch of time around Minnesota. So then the cornerbacks coach job opens and I'm going, man, this makes so much sense for, Joe having a friend in Nick to bring him up here. And they were so good last year. They were number one in opponent explosiveness in the passing game. They're limiting explosive plays. And that group, I thought, looking back at what he was able to do, Andre Cisco, Afado Melifonwu, lots of really good players that he's developed over the course of a few years. Jahad Carter going to Ohio State, transferring there, developed him up. So really good player development. Like you said, good recruiter on the East Coast in the Jersey area, Florida and Miami, Ohio from the Bowling Green days. But the thing that people aren't talking enough about is the schematic perspective here, because Nick Monroe worked in a 3-3-5 defense. And I like the idea of bringing in a staff member who has experience in that system, because Tony White, who was the DC at Syracuse, that he was interim DC for at Syracuse for the bowl game, is going to run the 3-3-5. Wisconsin's going to run a similar scheme that might be more multiple. So Monroe is seasoned in that, and he can provide that staff with some insight and ideas on what really causes problems for the 3-3-5 and what are some things that you could do to exploit that. So his perspective there, the tradition, the background, and he's got the best nickname on the recruiting trail, the Swag Daddy. So, I mean, you just can't even beat the nickname, the Swag Daddy. Like, they need to get some merch out. Like, yeah. I don't know what they're going to do, like Swag Daddy merch. Get on it, Nick Monroe. Like, if you're listening to this pod, get your agent on the Swag Daddy is back t-shirt or something.
100%. We're going to have Nick on the podcast here in a few weeks. We're at least hoping to set that up, so I'm looking forward to that. And he's a Matamidi native, so he grew up here because, as you mentioned, his dad was on staff here. At least he spent time here, and then played at St. Cloud State football when the Huskies had a football team. So I think it's a great fit. And you're right. It just sometimes look, you want to have that staff continuity. There's no doubt, but I also think there's benefits to having fresh voices come in and to hear. And look, Joe Rossi knows what he's doing. He doesn't need help probably, but I know that a new voice is fine. Speaking of that officiating story, Joe was telling me a little bit more about it. Suffice it to say, he didn't want to get into too many details, but he went from being he was making a little side income refereeing intramural games, which we all did at college, right? And there was a certain situation which eventually relegated him to being the scorekeeper for the rest of the year. No more reffing games. So that was I don't know if Monroe. I don't think Monroe was involved in that part of it. I think that was just an old Allegheny story. But because the sounds of it, Monroe and Joe Rossi really crossed paths for just a few months, as one was coming, one was going, but they knew of each other, and that certainly had to help here. But yeah, that's someday maybe Joe will tell that full story. But he just said, suffice it to say, the reffing days ended, and he became a scorekeeper the rest of the intramural season that year. So that basically ties up the defensive staff, or wraps up the defensive staff with those additions. And you mentioned that Monroe has that 3-3-5 background. It probably doesn't mean you're going to see some 3-3-5 for Minnesota. It can help, as you mentioned, when the Gophers face it. There's they're going to know where some of the crevices and the weaknesses might be. That said, that doesn't mean there aren't some concepts that Winston and Nick can bring in from other things that they could implement in situational play, if nothing else, right?
Yep, and Dennis Stoughton-Carter, too, an analyst that's coming in from Yale. He overlapped with Rossi at Maine. He was the co-DC and has a D-line coach background there as well. So his perspective, again, another analyst being able to come in and provide fresh ideas and perspective as well, and also has continuity and past relationship with Joe. So like everybody on that defensive staff, Joe has worked with and developed relationship with, and Danny Collins has been a long time coach under Fleck and Rossi. So I mean, they have a ton of continuity, really good staff on that side of the ball. We know that. I mean, you marvel. You sit down. Honestly, I don't think Minnesota fans really appreciate enough how good Minnesota defense is when it comes to fundamentals, understanding situations, playing with great detail. They're one of the best when you go back and look at the numbers of limiting missed tackles. I mean, they're outstanding tackling fundamentals. You come to a practice and you watch Joe Rossi coach up. I did an interview with Thomas Rush for a feature, and he just talked about, like, Joe Rossi is one of the smartest coaches I've ever been around, and will be one of the smartest coaches I have ever worked with. He can really do whatever he wants to do, and he's a rising star. Like he's the whole package.
Well, his nickname, like yours, the Guru. So the Guru. You guys share that nickname. You're the Gophers Guru, and he's the Gopher defensive coordinator Guru. No
he
question.
Hates that though. He's just like me. He's like, oh, don't call it the Guru. It's just this is just branding, Grim. Like me and Rossi will just me and Rossi will just ride off into the background, you know?
Well, I agree with you, too, in terms of I think the general fan doesn't realize how good the Gopher defense has been here for now. Yeah. Really, look, you take out the first 3 or 4 games of the COVID year when that was terrible. They were no good. They knew it. They didn't have experience or playing kids that shouldn't have been playing because, 1, COVID was there, and 2, they got hit by some transfers and injuries and whatever else. By the end of that COVID year, though, they were actually playing pretty stout defense. And so you count 2019, 2021, and 2022, and the end of 21. Was 21 the COVID year? Yeah, the end of 21. And that team has just had some really good defense. I get the numbers might be skewed a little by pace of play. The Gophers, try to slow the game down, limit the number of plays. And the Big Ten West isn't exactly known for a juggernaut, a bunch of offenses. So the raw numbers skewed a little, but not enough to say it's not just been a spectacular defense here for almost half a decade now.
Yeah, and ability to limit explosive plays, stop the run. I mean, this is a run conference. I mean, you got to be able to defeat blocks. You got to play. You got to set the edge, play with all the fundamentals that are required, the run fit side of it, and that's what people that on the outside don't realize, the complexities of defense when it comes to run fits. Like, that is such a core aspect of being successful. And Minnesota, with their defensive staff as a whole, they teach the fundamentals and the mental side of the game. I mean, I just go and I soak it all in. Like, it's so fun to watch Rossi and those guys coach.
Yep, and on both sides of the ball, they're not penalized much, and that certainly helps, and that's part of that coaching thing as well. They're amongst the least penalized teams on both sides.
You can read a study. You can read a study on that on the website.
Yeah. What else do you got, by the way, on the website that people tell us a little about the website? I want to ask you about spring ball and the combine, so we still have some things to talk about, but this would be a good chance for you to tell folks about the website. I know most people are familiar. You've been on the podcast a few times, but make your pitch here. It's a great site, lots of good content, gophersguru.com.
Yes, it's more of a next-gen approach to Gopher athletics, but also blending in the perspective of, interviews, features. I just did a story with Thomas Rush on his journey. I think he's just got an outstanding story of how he became who he is. So being able to blend in, who these players are and coaches and all them, it's just so much fun to tell their stories. And I really, that's a deep passion of mine, combined with the next-gen approach of football. I spend a lot of time studying the game and thinking about it outside the box, blending in the numbers in a way that people can understand it, but also pairing up the football schematics in a way that it's simplified so people can kind of look at the game differently. I want them to watch it and go, okay, what did I read about this week and how was it applied? And maybe teach somebody something that they didn't know about the game, and also maybe teach them, help them look at the game through a different lens. So that's kind of the approach, is blending those things together, break down some football research stuff, and then also the features so you can get to know players and coaches.
Very good. Gophersguru.com is the webpage for all the info. As we mentioned at the start of the podcast, Daniel, we're a little over 3 weeks from the first practice of spring ball. I guess, just shy of 2 months away from the spring game itself, which is April the 22nd, 11 o'clock at Huntington Bank Stadium. Please pray for some sunshine and nice weather on that April 22nd. It's been too many times we've had to move indoors or play in rain or what have you, so let's get some good weather this week, or this spring, I should say. Give me the top 3 or 4 storylines you think heading into spring that you will be, when you attend the open practices, that you will be keeping an eye on, if you would.
I would start at the defensive tackle spot. What does the rotational group look like there? You got Kyler Baugh and Trill Carter, who I think, you're looking for more consistency in the pass rush side of it. I just wrote a piece on that. Trill showed what he could do, previous seasons. So, being able to improve in that area, I think Trill, has a lot of unique traits, being able to hand combat, defeat blocks, create penetration in the run game. Like, he has all those traits. And Kyler Baugh last year, he's one of the strongest defensive tackles at the point of attack. And he was just getting his, feet wet coming in here, trying to learn everything. Now he's had a full year. I think you're going to notice a big leap from those two. But then it's behind them, Jacob Schuster, Darnell Jeffries, Devin Eastern, Logan Richter being more of a run stuffing type of defensive tackle who can help you in that capacity. So who emerges at that, those 1 tech and 3 tech spots? You got Jeffries and Eastern there. Eastern's just got a ton of upside just physically and with athletic traits. Now it's about putting it all together. And then Jacob Schuster being someone who's really quick in the hand combat stuff is what stood out on the high school film. And you saw some flashes of it. Now it's, again, just all about the development, seeing where he's at. I mean, we haven't been at a practice for a while, so I'm excited to watch that. I'd say the offensive line, who emerges for those starting spots. You're losing the entire interior of the O-line and starting wise, including the center spot. Nathan Bowe, probably the favorite to be the starting center. I've heard a lot of good things from players about him, the transformation that he's made, his leadership and work ethic. So looking forward to seeing him. Carter Shaw, transfer from Utah State. He has some center and guard experience, played a lot of snaps at right guard at Utah State. So him, Tyler Cooper inside, or do they look at, moving Quinn Carroll inside if one of these tackles plays really well in the spring, like J.J. Gaudet or Martez Lewis, putting them at right tackle and kicking Quinn inside. That's definitely options. But I wrote about all this on the website. You can check out that. And then finally, I'd say the third one is just the new additions, Crooms and Spencer at the wide receiver room, Sean Tyler at running back, Brian Seelig at linebacker, just those additions, and then getting a feel for where the roster's at, because May 1st to May 15th, you got another transfer window. You got grad transfers entering in. Where maybe do you go shopping and fill some, depth spots, or also get yourself an instant contributor? Because today, Beanie Bishop entered the transfer portal as well. So I would not be surprised if they ended up taking a cornerback in that room that's got some experience, because now, you got Justin Wally at the primary outside spot. And, Ryan Stapp can play outside or in. Jack Henderson from Southeastern Louisiana, a transfer nickel that sort of will fill that Michael Dixon role and is a huge part of what they do, on the run game, stopping the run on first and second down, having that guy that could set the edge like that. So who emerges there? Tariq Watson, Rylan Kelly, some of those younger players, to get a chance to see them in the spring and then explore what happens with this May transfer portal.
Yeah, and then if you're the Gophers, depending on who you value, you want to keep your fingers crossed that you're not losing anybody of value in that same period. And you're like, there'll probably be some movement, but it is what it is, right? That's the new world we live in. You watched the breakdown of Syracuse. You mentioned the cornerbacks, and with Nick Monroe, is there anything that you can discern on film in terms of how he coaches cornerback play and what that might mean to the defense?
Yeah, the whole passing game coordinator side of it, he was really tied into, limiting the explosive plays, like I said, and teaching the fundamentals to all of those players. Like Jihad Carter ended up going to Ohio State as a transfer. Deuce Chestnut was coveted in the portal. Like, they had a lot of players that were really, really sound, fundamentally well-coached players that, teams are interested in adding through the transfer portal. And Monroe, what I've heard from a lot of people is just the relationship building side of it. Like, this is a very genuine guy who, is outstanding on the recruiting trail that will help you a ton and build, relationships with his players that last a long time. I've heard, phenomenal things about just not only as a coach, but a person. So that makes sense just with how PJ approaches the type of coaches that he wants around the players and developing them.
All right, last topic for you, the outgoing Gophers who are hoping to play professional football. The NFL Combine is next week in Indianapolis. 4 Gophers invited: Muhammad Ibrahim, Terrell Smith, Jordan Howden, and John Michael Schmitz. Take us through a preview, if you would, of how you envision those 4 what you might think they'll experience next week.
Yeah, Terrell Smith was at the East-West Shrine Bowl and certainly performed extremely well. I had a chance to watch all the practice, all 22, and saw so many good reps. Like, we all knew his ability to cover vertical routes and, lean and locate and make, pass breakups and that side of it. And, just being able to show that he could play in zone and man and be able to break on the ball and have the instincts to understand the different route combinations. I thought he had a nice East-West Shrine Bowl, and now he gets to show his athletic ability. I think he's going to run really well. You saw his 100-meter when he came into Minnesota. He was extremely fast, and I think that's something that he'll show at the Combine. I see like a cross between Fabian Morrow and Jamel Dean, a couple of current NFL players, when you kind of project out what type of testing he could have. John Michael Schmitz, who was arguably, honestly, watching Senior Bowl stuff, was the one of the best players on the field overall. I've said for a long time, think he is one of the safest home run picks that you can make as an NFL team. Like, you want a 10-year starter, it's rock solid and does everything that you're looking for. That's your guy. I comped a lot to Alex Mack, who played for the Falcons in the Shanny offenses and shined as a center. He's got a lot of the same traits, and the measurements were so similar. I was like, this is pretty crazy to see when he measured at the Senior Bowl how close they were. So, I see some teams like the Bears, the Giants, the Seahawks, maybe the Vikings, if they want to solidify the center spot. Like, he can fit in multiple schemes and is a great fit. Jordan Howden, I comped him like a Chuck Clark safety for the Ravens. I thought he had a nice week working in the Patriots single high scheme. So Jordan, what a great story. A walk-on here at Minnesota that became a key player and slowly improved. I thought his tackling over the course of his career was something he improved a ton because he was really good in coverage. He was, cornerback in the past. Those coverage skills will suit him well. And then you look at Mohamed Ibrahim. I don't know, the whole testing side of it will be interesting. I don't know how much of it he's going to do at the combine, but, I've always said, it's interesting. The data is so bullish on like a Kevin Falk comp for Mohamed Ibrahim. And it's scary when you actually go and look at the numbers when he played at LSU, how close they were. I was kind of surprised by that comp, but it's certainly interesting to think about. So Mo, I feel like he showed at the East-West Shrine Bowl his receiving ability. Patriots are really testing him hard in that area to see what he can do, because if you're going to play in New England, you got to be able to catch the ball, and other teams wanted to see what he could do in that area. And I thought he did a nice job there. So that's another element that he can add to his game, and people know what type of person and competitor he is. So can't wait to see where Mo ends up.
So those four guys will be at the Combine. A few more guys played in some of the All-Star games. Tanner Morgan, I was on the road this week, so I was kind of half out of it in terms of trying to follow any kind of sports news other than Gopher basketball on Monday and Wednesday. But I saw he got drafted in was that the USFL? And I know he was in 2 All-Star games, right? And he was on the podcast at the end of the season after, he got his final win in the Pinstripe Bowl. So he was on the podcast at that point talking about the upcoming thing. So what do you think his future holds?
Yeah, and now he got drafted in the second round by the Michigan Panthers in the USFL, but he could still go through the draft process and explore that avenue in the NFL. But Michigan will own his draft rights if he wants to take that path down the road. But now Tanner's focused on the pro day, March 15th, the University of Minnesota. I have a lot of teams there. I go through and I look at, what he was able to do at the Hula Bowl. He didn't have an East-West Shrine Bowl invite until after the Hula Bowl. He performed very well working with Brian Billick down there. Then he gets a Shrine Bowl invite, has a chance to work with Atlanta's coaching staff and a system that fit his strengths really well. And then now he's training down in Florida, working away down there, getting ready for the pro day and working with the receivers that he's going to be throwing to at the pro day. So, I look at like some teams that I like, the Steelers, maybe Carolina, Las Vegas Raiders. The Steelers, it's interesting because Matt Canada is offensive coordinator for Pittsburgh, and he was an assistant coach when PJ played at Northern Illinois. He was like offensive coordinator in 2003. So they have a quarterback room. Mitch Trubisky could be released to free up cap space. You got Mason Rudolph, who's a UFA. So they have a quarterback room that could use somebody. So Tanner in Pittsburgh would be super intriguing, and Mike Tomlin being a coach here, I think would fit super well with Tanner's sort of mindset. And you mentioned Tanner, Thomas Rush as well. He's going to test very well, I think. The NFL teams would be impressed with him. I could even see a scenario where, I was looking at his testing numbers projecting out, all these teams are looking for ultra athletic fullbacks. Like Thomas Rush has a running back background. I wouldn't be surprised if some teams explored that avenue as well. So him and Mariano, he'll also be working out at the pro day as well. So it's just fun to see these guys. We've been around them for years now, 6-7 years. I mean, we've been through the whole journey. So we get to see them, pursue that next step, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. You said pro day on campus March 15th.
March 15th, yes.
Yeah, that's always a fun day to go hang out and see, all these scouts. And the testosterone level is fairly high in the building on those days when you got all those NFL scouts running around. I always get a kick out of it myself, maybe even giggle a little bit at times. But that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it for sure. Let me ask you this, and again, I've been kind of out of it this week, so if people are wondering how come I don't know this, it's because I don't know this. USFL and the XFL, what is it? So those are two different – who are they affiliated with now? I can't keep track of it.
USFL and the XFL are two separate leagues. Now, I would say the USFL is more of the NFL feeder league. They had like 69 guys end up getting training camp invites last year, so they play in April, and they'll start. I think the end of April is the first few games there, and that season stretches out throughout the spring. And then XFL just started last weekend. That's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's league. That's more of it's brand new. I mean, a developmental league, but USFL, I would say, is kind of one of the leagues that I could see potentially down the road becoming a feeder league for the NFL if they want to bring that in under their umbrella to give guys an opportunity to potentially elevate up to NFL rosters.
Yeah, and I think that's happened, right? I mean, even from a league standpoint, some of the stuff that they implemented a few years ago, even from an officiating standpoint and a game implementation standpoint, I think the NFL has used since. And so, and in fact, just talking to a couple of former Gophers, they kind of regretted not taking advantage of the USFL because that can be a trek to the NFL, right?
Well, yeah, and last year was relatively new, and now people see the results where it's like, hey, if you don't get a shot as a UDFA, you can go and try out the USFL. I would say with Tanner, one of the things right now was NFL teams are evaluating experience so much. These quarterbacks, you look at, like, scouts are asking themselves, what did you miss on Brock Purdy? Like, what was the element? What was the trait? And it was experience. That's what everybody in the league is talking about right now. So the timing of that Brock Purdy thing, plus the whole idea of watching a playoff game where you can't have a third quarterback on the roster, I would anticipate maybe the league adding the third quarterback rule back, or you can have a quarterback on the practice squad. That doesn't count against your 2 weekly elevations. So the amount of quarterbacks in the league might have just expanded. So those are two things that Tanner will certainly benefit from.
Yeah, and Tanner probably has that kind of almost backward stuff. He's not going to be a first-round pick, obviously, and so first-round picks, teams always want a 21-year-old, right? But later on, whether it's a late-round pick or an undrafted guy, you can pay a 24-year-old quarterback rookie money. So in a weird way, that can help Tanner Morgan, right? In the sense that, yeah, we got a guy who is old but is cheap.
Well, and he's experienced. PJ's talked about his football IQ and his understanding of the game. Like those starting quarterbacks, they love to have people in that room who can bounce ideas off each other, talk about what's going on during the game. And so Tanner's football IQ and that side of it, that's extremely valuable and something that teams value when they're looking at look at David Blau, quarterback for Purdue. He's been a journeyman backup across the league. And Kirk Cousins talked a lot about his ability to get him ready for games and how valuable that is. So Tanner having that trade is something that I think will help him throughout the draft process.
Indeed. All right, Daniel, I said we'd have you on for 30 minutes, and 64 minutes later, we're wrapping up podcast episode number 59. That just means you have good stuff, brother.
I know we probably talked too long, but I hope people enjoyed the content.
GophersGuru.com. Go find out all the information, all kinds of great content. One more time, let us know what the top 3 or 4 headlines on GophersGuru.com are right now. People should come and see.
You can come check out my feature on Thomas Rush, just an insight on him and his football journey, some offensive line write-ups on some things to watch for entering spring ball. Talked about interior defensive line push, the value of that, looking at some of the numbers and what Minnesota can do to improve in that area this year. So check it out. $5 a month gets you access to all the content.
All right, very good. GophersGuru.com. Daniel House. Look forward to seeing you at spring ball here in a few weeks, and certainly we will catch up again on the Go Gopher podcast and find out what you're up to next.
Appreciate it, Grim.
All right, there he is, Daniel House. It's episode number 59. I hope you enjoyed getting so much insight on Gopher football from the Gopher Guru Daniel House from GophersGuru.com. My thanks to Daniel for coming on the podcast. We'll have Daniel back on the podcast during the spring football season. The Go Gopher podcast episode number 59 is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or TNMA.com. AFFINITYNMA.com. Affinity Plus is your local credit union proudly serving Minnesota since 1930 and a proud sponsor of the Go Gopher podcast. If you're a current Gopher student or a proud Gopher alum, you're eligible to join a financial that wants to build a meaningful banking relationship and put you first. You can meet with a local employee at any of their branches statewide, including right off campus in Minneapolis. To learn more or find other ways to connect, go to affinityplus.org/Go Gophers. Affinity Plus Federal Credit Union, federally insured by NCUA. We're also brought to you by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and right now be sure to click the subscribe button to the Go Gopher podcast. It's free to subscribe and free to listen. Hope you enjoyed listening. We'll talk again next week.